Hello and welcome to the Practical Pediatric Medical Information Channel. Wow, that's a mouthful. I am MZMD. I'm a board-certified pediatrician. I am licensed in several states in the United States. I would like to emphasize that this video and all other videos on this channel are meant to be informational only and are not meant to be a substitute for diagnosis and treatment by your child's doctor. I hope that you will join me on these coming videos, and do not forget to like, share, and subscribe. Remember, subscribing does not mean that you're paying anything, but that's a way of notifying you when a new video has been uploaded to this channel. So let's proceed to the next topic. Vaccines are utilized to prevent or to decrease the severity of certain infections. These infections may be viral or bacterial, but they are in two general categories. The first category are those infections which are considered untreatable. That means you cannot kill them. However, some of these infections are very severe and may cause considerable morbidity or mortality. Morbidity means disability. Those disabilities could be brain damage, vision loss, hearing loss, seizures, paralysis, and many others. Mortality refers, of course, to death. The second category are those infections which may be treated with medications, but even when treated, these infections can lead to severe morbidity or even mortality in some people. So in other words, vaccines are not utilized to treat minor infections. They're not used to decrease discomfort, but they are utilized to prevent those infections which can cause, again, severe morbidity or even mortality. How do vaccines work? Well, vaccines work in the sense that you create an immune response to an organism. These organisms are introduced as fragments or whole cells into the body, and then the body recognizes this as something that's not normally there and produces an immune response, which may be an antibody, which is what we call a blood-borne immune reaction, or it could be a cellular immunity to the specific organism or fragment of an organism which is introduced to the body. Antigens are those molecules which produce or elicits an immune response. So when we present to the body a fragment of an organism or the entire organism, that is what we call an antigen. That then produces an immune response in the body. This immune response is stored in memory cells. So when in the future that person comes into contact with that organism again, their immune system immediately pushes forth the immune response, and in so doing either eliminates the organism or decreases the severity of the illness. How do we introduce these antigens or organisms to the body? There are three general categories. One is through the mouth, oral. The other is intranasal as a spray. And the third category, which accounts for most vaccines, are injections. The injections may be below the skin, which is referred to as subcutaneous, or SQ is the abbreviation, or it may be intramuscular, which is IM, stands for intramuscular. When an organism is introduced into the body as a vaccine, that organism may be dead or may be alive. The dead organisms typically, because they're dead, cannot cause the illness we're trying to prevent. And the live organisms may cause a very mild illness. Those organisms or live organisms, when they are introduced into the body, are made less infectious by certain chemical processes, which means if you do get a mild infection from that vaccine, it will be very mild. How effective are vaccines? Well, the effectiveness ranges. Vaccines have to be proven to be safe and effective. They then have to be approved by the FDA. I would refer you back to my last video, which has to do with proof and how we go about proving certain things. So again, vaccines have to be proven that they're safe and effective. Most vaccines' effectiveness range from a percentage of approximately 20% all the way to 99, 98%. Now, typically the less effective vaccines have to do with mutation of the organisms. So some organisms are rapid mutators, and therefore a vaccine that's produced to a specific strain may not be as effective because that strain may have mutated before it gets to that person, and therefore the vaccine may not be as effective. A typical example of this is influenza. And that is one of the reasons why we have to do influenza vaccines every year, because these organisms mutate, and a vaccine that's given this year may not be effective for next year. And very similarly, a vaccine that was produced early in the year may not be effective at the time the organism penetrates or infects that person. Other organisms do not readily or rapidly mutate. Therefore, vaccines to these organisms may have a much higher effective rate of prevention of infection with that organism. Vaccines are most effective if large amounts of people become vaccinated. So even though a single person may be vaccinated and may have, let's say, an 80% chance of not contracting the illness when they are exposed to that organism, they still have a chance of getting that illness. The chance becomes much less if everyone around that person is vaccinated. Think of it as a fence with individual pickets. There's a bad dog on the other side of the fence. If the fence is strong because each picket is strong and is in place, there's very little likelihood that that dog will get to the other side. However, if there are individual pickets which are rotted or not present or wobbly, that dog may have a better chance of skirting the fence. Same with vaccines. The more people who are vaccinated, the less chance of infections occurring in even a person who has been vaccinated. So it's very important that as a population, everyone who needs to be vaccinated is vaccinated. Are there side effects to vaccines? Yes, there are. As with everything in life, there are risks and benefits. When you step outside to the sidewalk, there is a risk that the car could hit you. When you go into your car, there's a risk that you can have an accident. When you go into a plane, you have a risk that there could be a plane crash. However, you have to weigh the benefits versus the risks. If the benefits of the action you are doing outweighs the risk of that action, then it's plausible that you would take that action. Similarly with vaccines, the illnesses we are trying to prevent aren't minor illnesses. These are illnesses, again, that create or produce major morbidity and also mortality in an individual person. And the risk of side effects from a vaccine are minuscule compared to what would happen if you get that illness. Some of these side effects are very minor, and most of them are minor. The usual side effects are headache, some body aches, maybe a little bit of fever, some fatigue, and these usually occur within 24 hours of the vaccine and may last about 24 hours. And that's the vast majority of vaccines. Those are the types of side effects. With some cases, which are very rare, you may have in some people fevers, which could be very high and can result in some seizures. In very, very small amounts of populations, you may have an allergic reaction to the vaccine. But again, that is very rare. And since we are trying to prevent serious infections, it is worth that tiny risk to try and stop the types of illnesses that we are trying to prevent. With vaccines, we are a victim of our success. We have been so successful in utilizing vaccines to prevent major infections that most of these infections have been so well under control that we don't see them any longer. So people get very complacent, and then they start viewing vaccines as the enemy. And they come up with all kinds of myths and different reasons why they do not want themselves or their children to be vaccinated. Some of these myths are, well, you're introducing something abnormal to your body, so it's like a poison. What people fail to realize is that we are getting bombarded on a daily basis with viruses and bacteria in our mouths. As I'm speaking right now, there are viruses that are going into my mouth. We get bombarded by bacterial infections, fungal infections, through the mouth, through the nose, through the eyes, and in all different forms of contact that we have throughout our daily life. So introducing small fragments of organisms are not harmful in the sense that it's something extremely unusual that you're doing. The next myth is we are going to delay the vaccine, or we're going to go on a different schedule. Many parents do this type of maneuver. However, these vaccines, when they were studied to show effectiveness and lack of side effects, they had to be given in a certain sequence. And when we change that sequence or we delay the vaccine, we do not know if the vaccine will be as effective as it was shown in the study. The other thing about delaying vaccines are given at a specific time when that organism is most harmful to a specific person. So for example, the polio, the Hib, the DPT, we start early on with children because children have less immunity and less of an effective immune response when they are younger. And these organisms will cause these infections when they are very young. Also, that is why we have to give children multiple doses of vaccines, because their immune system do not respond as well as an adult. So you have to boost their immune system in several instances to get that immune response. Similarly, we do not give shingles vaccine to children. We give it to older adults because that's when the problem is most prevalent. So changing a schedule or delaying a vaccine is not logical. The other major myth is that vaccines cause autism. This myth was started by a fraudulent investigator in England who made up data to show that the MMR vaccine was associated with autism. He was found out many years later that this was fraudulent, and his license was also revoked. Many studies were done prior to this, since that initial fraudulent study, and have not shown any association with vaccines causing autism. However, this got out into the media and to a certain group of people who are anti-vaccines, and this has been propagated throughout the years. But again, this is a myth. At this present time, there have been many studies which have been done on vaccines, and none of them have shown any cause and effect or significant association between vaccines and autism. How important are vaccines? Well, I can give you my own personal history with vaccines in terms of giving vaccines to children. When I began my pediatric training, there was an organism called HIB, or for short HIB, which caused severe devastation in children. Children routinely got this organism, and many of them had meningitis, resulting in hearing loss, in seizures, and even brain damage. This organism caused many illnesses in children. Just to give you an example, the first day as an intern, I was on call admitting patients. And of the 10 patients I admitted on that day, 6 of them had Hib meningitis. There were 2 others with meningitis, but they were viral meningitis. Hib is a bacterial organism. Now, this was routine. Everything we learned in pediatric residency was geared around Hib. There were multiple stacks of articles that would fill up shelves on what we needed to do about the Hib organism. By the time I left medical school, the vaccine had just come out, or the vaccine had just been introduced for public use. Within 1 year of the Hib vaccine being introduced, the incidence of Hib infections dropped precipitously. And within 2 years, where we were admitting people on a routine basis for Hib meningitis, we did not see any. And I have not seen a case of Hib meningitis or Hib infection since I completed my residency. When I started practicing as a pediatrician, there was an organism called the rotavirus organism, which caused significant gastroenteritis, vomiting, and diarrhea in children. On average, we were admitting about 3 patients per week into the hospital with significant dehydration from infection with this organism. The vaccine was introduced several years later, and a year after introduction of this vaccine, our admissions for gastroenteritis with children went from 3 per week to 1 in a 6-month period, and that organism was not rotavirus. And that's how incredible vaccines are in preventing serious infections, again, morbidity and mortality. So in summary, should you have your children vaccinated? Absolutely. These illnesses, serious illnesses, which we have been able to prevent, which used to devastate people before vaccinations, we've been able to control with vaccinations. However, it does not mean that these illnesses have disappeared completely from the face of the planet. Russia learned this after the Cold War, when the USSR broke up. They did not have enough money to produce vaccine. Diphtheria, an illness that was unheard of for years and years and years, came back with a vengeance. And they had to somehow get vaccinations up against this organism. There have been a few European countries who have flirted with stopping vaccinations in their countries, and very quickly after they have stopped it, many of these illnesses which had seemed to have disappeared came right back, and they had to restart giving vaccinations again. So yes, vaccinations are important. It doesn't mean we have to produce vaccines to every minor illness, but for the ones that we have right now, it is important that your child gets vaccinated, and also vaccinated at the time that it says that they need to be vaccinated. Because those vaccines have been studied in a certain way, and they're to prevent infections which occur at certain age groups. I hope this has been helpful. This is MZMD wishing you a healthy life.